Thank you so much, Tim, for blessing us. Genesis chapter 1 is where we'll be for the whole month of January. Genesis chapter 1. I'm super excited about this series, and here's the reason why. We're coming to this church from a lot of theological and ecclesiological backgrounds. In other words, people have been in different churches denominationally, and we've experienced different traditions, and everybody believes a lot of different things, and all of that is okay. What we want to do in this Genesis series is to lock in with the book of beginnings. So all of the Bible is rooted in Genesis. So there's a hypothesis that I actually believe that if you get Genesis right, then there's a pretty good chance you get the rest of the Bible right. So we want to lean in to Genesis and recalibrate and reset our thoughts and our theology about who God is and what He's called us to be as the people of God. And so let me read in for your hearing this introduction, and follow me as I just read along as you listen in. Since the rise of modern science, a war has been raging and growing increasingly intense. Bombs are dropping, cannons are booming, guns are firing, grenades are exploding, and landmines are detonating. The war-torn catastrophes are everywhere. The destruction is vast. The toll this battle is taking is exponentially mounting. The signs of massive carnage are before you when you look in any direction. How long will the battle rage? How long will the war wage on? How long can we endure the fierce fighting going on all around us and yet live in the midst of it undisturbed? Now, I know what you're thinking. How long will it take for us to be disturbed by the disturbance? You're probably thinking, Pastor, what disturbance? And I'll ask you another question. How long will it take for us to join the fight? What disturbance, what fight, what war, what battle are you talking about? That's probably what you're thinking. And either the revolution is not being televised, or we've become so desensitized by the war that the effects of it have become the new normal. Here's breaking news, folks. For Reconciled Church LA, there's a battle for the beginning. What beginning? The beginning of human history, the natural world, the universe. Now, the obvious question is, why is there a battle for the beginning? Why is this fierce war? Why is this the fiercest war in human history? Well, George Orwell, in the classic science fiction novel called 1984, famously penned these words. He said, "Whoever controls the past controls the future, and whoever controls the present controls the past." You see it now? Is it clear to you? If the Judeo-Christian teaching that God existed before the natural world came into existence, if that is what we affirm, then and that He brought the world into existence by His own power and will, then He controls the past, the present, and the future. And every nation, tribe, language, and people group owes their absolute allegiance, obedience, and devotion to Him. If, on the other hand, the universe came into existence by random chance, through natural selection, by an unguided, fortuitous stroke of luck, then that simply means that we came from nothing and that we're going to nothing when we die, and therefore, if we came from nothing and we're going to nothing in the end, then nothing means nothing in the middle. In other words, life is a big nothing burger. Nothing means nothing. Our lives are meaningless, invaluable, and none of this has any value or any worth. Now, can you see why the atheists, under the disguise of objective science, want to rewrite history? human history, natural history, can you see why they would want an origin of the universes that does not need or include the God of the Bible? Now, I want to share with you an excerpt from Friedrich Nietzsche's book, The Gay Science, written in 1882. He wrote in that book a parable of the madman, and I want to share with you the parable of the madman here in today's text. And the parable simply says this. Follow along with me, and it'll come up on the screen. The parable of the madman says this. Have you not heard of that madman who lit a lantern in the bright morning hours, ran into the marketplace and cried insistently, I'm looking for God, I am looking for God. As many of those who did not believe in God were standing there, and he excited considerable laughter. Have you lost him then, one said. Did he lose his way like a child, said another. Or is God hiding? Is he afraid of us? Has he gone on some voyage or immigrated? Thus they shouted and laughed. The madman sprang into their midst and pierced them with his glances. Where has God gone? He cried. I shall tell you, we have killed him, you and I, we are his murderers. But how have we done this? How were we able to drink up the sea? Who gave us the sponge to wipe away the entire horizon? What did we do when we unchained the earth from the sun? Whither is it moving now? Whither are we moving now? Away from all suns, are we not perpetually falling backward, sideward, forward, in all directions? Is there any up or down left? Are we not straying as through an infinite nothing? Do we not feel the breath of empty space? Has it not become colder? Is it not more and more night coming on all the time? Must not lanterns be lit in the morning? Do we not hear anything yet of the noise of grave diggers who are burying God? Do we not smell anything yet of God's decomposition? You know, God's decomposed too. God is dead, God remains dead, and we have killed him. How shall we murderers, all murderers, console ourselves? That which was the holiest and mightiest of all that the world has yet possessed has bled to death under our knives. Who will wipe his blood off us? With what water could we purify ourselves? What festivals of atonement, what sacred games shall we need to invent? Is not the greatness of this deed too great for us? Must we not ourselves become gods simply to be worthy of it? There has never been a greater deed, and whatsoever shall be born after us, for the sake of this deed, he shall be a part of a higher history than all history hitherto. Here the madman felt silent and again regarded his listeners, and they too were silent and stared at him in astonishment. At last he threw his lantern on the ground, and it broke and went out. I have come too early, the madman said to them. My time has not yet come. The tremendous event is still on its way, still traveling. It has not yet reached the ears of men. Lightning and thunder require time. The light of the stars require time. Deeds require time, even after they are done, before they can be seen or heard. This deed is still more distant from them than the distant stars, and yet they have done it themselves. It has been further related that on that same day the madman entered the churches and there sang the Requiem Aeternam Deo, which is interpreted the eternal rest of God. Led out and quieted, he is said to have retorted each time, what are these churches now? if they are not the tombs and sepulchres of God. So Nietzsche, in this parable of the madman, tells the story of this man who is desperately looking for God, and he runs into a crowd of atheists who challenge him and say, man, you are out of your mind. Why are you looking for God? Don't you know he's dead? I killed him and so did you. We are his murderers, and we've buried him. And so why are you looking for the living, for the dead among the living? Now, Nietzsche's parable of the madman is really indicative of the world in the 19th and 20th century, and now even in the 21st century, as we live in a world that has devised a history, a story, and a narrative that doesn't include or need God at all. And Nietzsche was really just articulating the sentiments that people already believe and ascribe to. So I love this parable of the madman because it's a brazen attempt to articulate our atheistic and nihilistic philosophies. Nihilism is the idea that life is meaningless, that there is no purpose, that there is no direction of life, and so nothing means, life doesn't mean anything. There is no purpose. There is no goal. There is no end. And it just is what it is. And Nietzsche is the father of nihilism. Now, here's a question we want to ask as we transition into the message today. Is there an answer? Is there a counter to Nietzsche's arrogant, bombastic, blasphemous parable? Is there an answer? How do we respond to that? Is God dead? And have we buried him? Are we his murderers? Or is God alive? In Genesis, the story of Genesis, this book that we will refer to as Bereshit because of the first word in the Hebrew Bible, Genesis tells us a different story of God. And so what I want to do is look at Genesis chapter 1, and I want to show it to you in the Hebrew text because in the Hebrew Bible, Genesis 1 has 7 words. And it's important. Numbers matter in the biblical text. They matter to the Jewish people. And so there are 7 words in the Hebrew. And I've translated the text for you, familiar text, but 7 words in the Hebrew. And the first one is Bereshit bara Elohim, right? In the beginning, God created. Et hashemayim va'et ha'eretz, right? So Bereshit, in the beginning, it's a prepositional phrase, in beginning or in a beginning. There's no definite article. Bereshit, which is why Genesis in the Hebrew Bible is called Bereshit. In the beginning, bara, created God, Elohim. That is God's name in Genesis chapter 1. He doesn't share with us, Moses doesn't share with us Yahweh's name until chapter 2, so he is Elohim in the text. And in the beginning, God creates Hashemayim, the heavens, and Ha'eretz, the earth. 7 words in the Hebrew text, 10 words in our English text. So what I want to do is focus on 3 of the most important words in Genesis chapter 1. Bereshit bara Elohim. The first 3 words are the most important words in the text. So if you're keeping notes, the outline is in the beginning, God created. So let's look at those 3 words and let's draw some principles. We're going to look at some videos today that I think will help enhance our understanding of Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. So here's the first big idea that we want to wrap our minds around in Genesis chapter 1 is the first thing we want to see is that the universe had a beginning, right? The universe is not eternal. Nobody in science affirms that the earth is eternal. By all the cosmological evidence, the earth has a beginning. And Genesis affirms that reality. And so while people in the ancient world were not scientists or cosmologists, they understood that the earth, like everything else, must have had a beginning. As they observed life and living organisms, they accepted the fact that all of these things must have had a beginning. So again, this prepositional phrase, in the beginning, can but doesn't necessarily denote a point in time, but really a period of time. And so there's certainty that the universe came into a being at a moment in time. However, this phrase, Barashit, does not necessarily or particularly point to a moment in time, but a period of time. Science tells us that the world came into being at a particular moment in time. It wasn't a gradual coming into existence. There's this idea of the Big Bang theory that the earth exploded into existence. The problem is we as Christians differ on the explosion. We affirm that a Big Bang probably happened, but a Big Bang can't happen when nothing exists, right? You can't get everything out of nothing. And so something must precede the something in order to cause the bang to happen. So anyway, scientists are tying themselves into pretzels, trying to keep from acknowledging God by also asserting and affirming this ridiculous and illogical hypothesis that the universe didn't exist, but then it had to exist in order to bang, which is illogical and absurd and just goes against all logic and all rationale. What we would argue is, yeah, we would affirm a Big Bang, but there had to be something that existed to cause the Big Bang to happen, and that something that existed, we would argue is God, right? And so the universe has a beginning. We as Christians, we affirm that. Modern science affirms that, so we don't have to argue about that. The second big idea from Genesis chapter 1:1 is that God is the singular subject of the universe's beginning. There's one person described in Genesis 1:1, and it's not Adam, and it's not Eve, and it's not the serpent, it's not Lucifer. The primary subject of the Bible's first verse is Elohim. This Hebrew word for God, it's a general word used in the ancient Near East by all of the people from the Semitic world. Is this name Elohim? It's the plural name of the generic name of El. So El is just a general. You know how we use God, big God, little God, to talk about all the gods in modern religion. And we use God as that blanket term. El and Elohim is another just blanket term that people in the Semitic world use for God. Elohim is different from the base El in the sense that Elohim is a plural noun. In other words, it translates the gods because El is added with Him, and Him is the way you pluralize things in the masculine gender. So Elohim translates to the gods. So it can mean, if you're referring to multiple gods, if you're talking about the gods of the ancient Near East or the Mediterranean world, you would use Elohim. And so the Jewish people, Moses in this case, refers to God, and the Jewish people refer to God as Elohim, not to refer to the gods, but to refer to the one God who they worshiped and affirmed. Well, why do they use a plural name to refer to a singular God? Great question. We've been theologizing on that for thousands of years. We think that Elohim really refers to a plurality of majesty. In other words, that God is so awesome, He's so majestic, so marvelous, so spectacular, so excellent that He's too great to even be called a singular person or entity, that He is so infinite and so incomprehensible that you must refer to Him in the plural. I'm a singular person, you're a singular person, but God is not from this world. He is not like us, and he cannot be referred to in the singular because he's so vast and so complex that you must refer to him in the plural. So we refer to this God as Elohim. Now, referring to God, Christians have picked up on that and said, man, if God's name is Elohim and it means a plurality of gods, doesn't that affirm the Trinity? Well, it could. I don't think Moses, who uses this name, understood anything about a Trinity. Elohim allows for the Trinity, but it doesn't necessarily affirm or assert the Trinity. Now, I'm on this side of the cross, and I would say Elohim is a veiled way to speak to the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And we're going to see all three actively engaged in creation. And so I believe that this references the Trinity, but that's not what Moses was thinking when he wrote this particular text and when he calls God Elohim. And so what we see is that the God of the universe is the God who has a plurality of majesties, and he's sovereignly and gloriously creating the earth. Now, let's move to the second idea, and then we're going to lock in with some videos that I think are going to enhance our experience today. The third big idea from the text is the third word that we want to focus on, is that God created the universe. So this word bara that we talked about earlier, when the text says Bereshit bara Elohim, God created, this word bara is used 48 times in the Hebrew Bible. And every time that it is used, pay attention to this, God is the only subject of this word. Humans don't bara. I'm going to let that sit in the room. We don't create. The Bible uses another word later in the text, asa in the Hebrew, which is to make. Humans asa things, we make things, but we don't bara things. So what is it about this word, and what is it about this creative activity that is exclusive and unique to only God himself? And all of the Hebrew authors affirm that God is the only one who baras. What is that? Well, what we see in the text is that there's a difference between a mediated versus unmediated creativity. Mediated creativity is the act of creating while utilizing or working with existing materials. If you think of an artist who is painting on a canvas, that artist must have paint. He or she must have a canvas, chisel, paint brushes, or if they're a musical artist, they must have musical notes and an instrument, and then they can create music. Ask Armani, he writes songs all the time, but he is just making music. He's not creating music. He's using chords and musical notes, melodies to make something, but he's not creating something. An unmediated creativity is the act of creating without the materials needed. And so what God is doing in Genesis chapter 1 is that God is creating because God is making something that doesn't already exist. And this is the idea that we want to talk about when we get on the other side of this video. So the first video that I want to show you is from these guys who, these Christian cosmologists, they put together this idea that we as human beings live on a privileged planet. There's an idea out there that Earth and humans are not special, they're not spectacular, but the reality is that is not true. What God did in creating the heavens and the earth is pretty spectacular. And so I want to show you the first video, which is a trailer to this series, and we'll come back later with clip number 2. So if you guys would roll that clip, that'd be awesome.
A lot of things went right on Earth to have yielded complex life, absolutely.
The number of factors that have been postulated has grown. Currently, the typical number you would see is, in a typical list, would have something like 20.
We find that we need to be at the right location in the galaxy, that we're inside the circumstellar habitable zone of a star, that we're in a planetary system with giant planets that can shield the inner planets from too many comet impacts, that we're orbiting the right kind of star that's not too cool or not too hot, that we're on a planet that has a moon that can stabilize the tilt of its axis, that we're on a planet that's a terrestrial planet, a planet that has a crust that's just thick enough that it can maintain plate tectonic activity, that it has enough heat in its interior that it's still circulating its liquid iron core so it can generate a magnetic field, that it has an atmosphere that has enough oxygen to allow for complex organisms to survive, that it has enough water and enough continents to allow for the diversity of life for an active biosphere that you need to support complex creatures such as ourselves. All these factors have to be met at one place and time in the galaxy if you're going to have a planet as habitable as the Earth, which you need for complex and even technological life.
In an attempt to estimate the probability of attaining this combination of factors simultaneously, some researchers have developed equations assigning a conservative 1 in 10 value to each factor deemed necessary for advanced life.
If every element has to be there at the same time, you have to multiply the probabilities. And that's what makes the probability at the end so small. You've got 10% of this and 10% of that, and these things rapidly multiply to exceedingly small numbers. The numbers on the order of 10 to minus 15, which is 1/1000th of 1 trillionth. And it's a number like that that you have to compare to the 100 billion stars that are in the galaxy. 100 billion is a very large number, but 1,000th of a trillionth is much, much smaller. On their face value, these probabilities are speaking. What they're telling us is this can't happen, or this is very unlikely to happen in the galaxy. And that's where the evidence is pushing us.
There are many probabilistic resources in the galaxy, but on the other side of the coin are all these factors that you need. You have to get just right in order to have just one habitable planet like the Earth. And that leads me to conclude that yes, we're rare in the galaxy.
Now, I know we are not cosmologists, astrophysicists in the room, but I think it's clear to lay people like us. Maybe Brandon gets this kind of stuff, but for lay people like us, the reality is that if God created this world with all of these complexities, that all of these essentials to ensure that complex life exists on this planet, and every single one of these elements has to exist at the optimal level and never, ever be diminished or increased. But it has to stay stagnant for all of time and all of eternity for complex life and complex organisms like us to exist. I don't know about you, but it takes less faith for me to believe that God did that than it is to believe that natural selection and random chance produce the absurd randomness of all of that happening and stand in that stagnant, stationary place for thousands of years. So when we talk about bara, when we talk about in the beginning God created, I want you to think about the complexity of what God did. Now Moshe in his primitive theology and cosmology just sums up that God created the heavens and the earth. He didn't have the Hubble telescope. If he did, he would have called this a universe. He would have talked about the universe and the millions of galaxies and the billions and trillions of stars and supernovas and the moon and the sun, which he gets into next week. But there is just something sensational that God does. And God does this ex nihilo. In theology, we talk about God's creative act being ex nihilo. In other words, God brings this ex out of nihilo, nothing. And so God brings the universe into existence with a big bang, if that's your thing. God brings it into existence, and he brings everything out of nothing. Now, I want to go on a little bit of an excursus, because ex nihilo is not in Genesis 1:1, but the rest of the Bible makes a case. And so I want to take a little bit of an excursus. Let me detour a little bit and make a case for God's ex nihilo creative act. Just look at a couple verses with me from the New Testament. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 3 says, "By faith we understand that the universe was created by the word of God, so that what is seen was made from things that are not visible." In other words, God brings what is visible out of what is invisible. God brings what is seen from what is unseen. God speaks, and the universe leaps into existence. This is the ex nihilo idea that God postulates in Scripture. Paul jumps on board with this in Colossians chapter 1, verse 15, 16, and 17, where Paul says, and the verses are up on the screen, Paul says that Jesus is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. For everything was created by him in heaven and on earth, the visible and the invisible, whether thrones or dominions, rulers or authorities, all things have been created through him and for him. Paul puts Jesus in the beginning with God creating at the very outset. Now I love this in verse 17. This is one of my favorite verses in the Bible. Paul says that Jesus is before all things, and by him all things consist or hold together. So not only is God creating ex nihilo and giving us this privileged planet in this privileged place in the Milky Way galaxy, but Jesus is holding us in that privileged place. Now I want to show you another video. This video is going to speak to our unique position in the universe, and it's called the galactic habitable zone. There's one place in our Milky Way, in our galaxy, for life to exist, and planet Earth is in that one place. And we've always been in that one place, and that's because God put us there, and he's held us there from the very beginning. So I want to roll this next video, and then we'll make some notes on the other side of it.
In 1997, Guillermo Gonzalez began a study of the Earth's specific location within the Milky Way galaxy. It would eventually lead him to more evidence of a correlation between life and discovery.
Just as our location in the solar system is optimized for habitability, so is our location in the galaxy. We inhabit a spiral galaxy, which means it's highly flattened. It has a spherical bulge in the center, and it has spiral arms. And we live about halfway between the center of the galaxy and the edge.
Working closely with astrobiologists Peter Ward and Donald Brownlee, Gonzalez compared our position in the Milky Way to other regions within an often hostile galaxy.
The galaxy has a lot of dangers, and perhaps the most dangerous place in the galaxy is the galactic center.
Well, in the center of the galaxy, this density of stars is very high, and there are more supernovas and stuff. And there are things that could harass life right in the dead center regions of our galaxy.
You also have the giant black hole at the very center of the galaxy. And if it were to have a close encounter with a star passing near it, it would rip it to shreds and form an accretion disk around it and emit lots of radiation, particle radiation and electromagnetic radiation, gamma rays, X-rays.
While a black hole, exploding stars, and deadly radiation would make complex life virtually impossible near the galactic core, the outer edge of the Milky Way poses other challenges to habitability.
In the outer regions, the situation is much more subtle. We live on a planet made out of iron, magnesium, and silicon, and oxygen. If we went in the more distant regions of our galaxy, out towards the outer edge, the abundances of these elements are lower.
There probably aren't enough heavy elements to build Earth-sized planets that can support life. So there's a happy median between the dangerous galactic center and the outer edge of the galaxy.
Gonzalez, Brownlee, and Ward labeled this region, where complex life is possible within the Milky Way, the galactic habitable zone. Their theory was first published in 2001 and has since received growing acceptance among astrobiologists.
There's a lot more research that needs to be done to determine just how wide the habitable zone is. But I think there's general agreement that yes, there are definitely places in the galaxy that you cannot have civilizations because they're very dangerous. And there are places where you just have a very low abundance of heavy elements.
While these obstacles to habitability are minimized far from the core and edge of the Milky Way, Gonzalez has also identified large areas within the galactic habitable zone itself, which are less hospitable to complex life.
Even within the habitable zone in the galaxy, it's broken by the spiral arms, which are dangerous places. That's where most of the supernovae go off in the galaxy. That's where the star formation is taking place.
We don't want to be too close to a spiral arm. We want to be outside the spiral arm at about the right region of the galaxy.
It appears this is precisely where the Earth is located, in the relatively safe and uncrowded region between the Sagittarius and Perseus arms of the Milky Way.
Location is everything, and so we occupy that special place in the galaxy where habitability is optimized, threats are minimized, and we have enough building blocks to build an Earth.
Guillermo Gonzalez and Jay Richards have conducted research on another facet of the galactic habitable zone. They now argue that the Earth is also located in the best setting within our galaxy for astronomical research.
As it turns out, our position in the universe is not only critical for life, but it's also surprisingly important for making scientific discoveries. We're located near the midplane of the galaxy, a very highly flattened galaxy, between spiral arms in a region with very low dust extinction. While we are in the plane of the galaxy, that does not obscure a large part of the sky, so we can have very clear views.
For more than a century, this nearly ideal platform of observation has enabled astronomers to study the structure of the Milky Way. Looking toward the constellation Sagittarius on a clear night, for example, we see that the stars in our galaxy are not uniformly distributed across the sky. Instead, they appear as part of a concentrated band, a flattened disk of stars, dust and gas, 100,000 light-years in diameter.
The Milky Way band in the night sky is us looking edge-on into the plane of the galaxy. If we were living in the center of the galaxy, things would look much more spherically distributed. And so it would be very hard to distinguish things that are inside the galaxy from things that are outside. And it's also very dusty, much dustier towards the galactic center than it is in our region. And so the views of the distant universe will be much more difficult to obtain, they'll be much more compromised.
Similar problems would exist for astronomers working on a planet located within any of the galaxy's spiral arms. Here, denser concentrations of dust clouds and gas illuminated by stars would make it difficult to determine the shape of the Milky Way, or to distinguish the stars in our galaxy from the rest of the universe.
On the surface of the Earth, we're really in the optimum position for seeing both the nearby structure of the Milky Way galaxy, as well as seeing the distant cosmos as a whole. So once again, we see that the best location for habitability and for producing a habitable planet is also the best overall position for scientific discovery, in this case at the galactic scale. For centuries, the fact that we can discover things about the universe has really been something of a mystery. Why would beings like ourselves be able to discover a universe like this? Why is what we think about the universe, why would it correspond to the way things really are?
Our ability to discern and understand the universe is a fundamental part of what makes the universe tick, so that we're linked into it. This isn't just a sort of an accident, a trivial little byproduct. It is something that is linked to the great cosmic scheme of things. Now, I've no idea how that linkage works, why it's there, or anything of that sort, but I'm very, very struck by the fact that we can understand the universe in such exquisite detail and at such a deep level.
The spectacular progress of modern astronomy and physics is the product of a universe accessible to the human eye and mind. It is a universe governed by laws and forces that literally hold our planet Earth and the entire cosmos together, and are finely calibrated to allow for both complex life and scientific discovery.
Can I interpret that video for you? Two big takeaways. The first one is that we live in this galactic habitable zone. In other words, there seems to be one place right in the middle of the Milky Way where complex life can exist. Not too close to the center of the galaxy where there's a black hole, supernovas, and a lot of collisions and things where stars would collide with our planet and would destroy all life on planet Earth. So we're not too close to the center of the galaxy and not too far away from the middle of the galaxy where there are not enough of the elements needed on Earth to sustain complex life. So God has us right smack dab in the middle, and we are not connected to any of those galactic arms that they talked about. So the first thing is we are right in the middle, right in the prime place where life can exist. The other big takeaway is that God put us also in that galactic habitable zone, that God put us in a place where we are not inundated by cosmic dust and things that would cloud our ability to discover what's going on in our galaxy and in our universe. In other words, God put us in such a unique place in the galactic habitable zone that he made it possible for us to explore and discover his greatness in creation. Because we could be in this privileged position, but not have the ability to know it, discover it, or understand it. God not only did something spectacular for us, but he made it possible for us to learn and discover what he's done. Albert Einstein said it's incomprehensible that what we see is comprehensible. That's the other big takeaway. And that's why science is so important, that God wanted us, and he gave us the capacity and the mind to be able to develop technology to see his handiwork in creation. Because God could have put us some other place in the galaxy where we could have just enjoyed this wonderful privileged planet, but never know that it was privileged. This is not the typical stuff on a Sunday morning at church, but that's what makes us unique. God, I wanted you guys to see these videos, to see that God is an amazing God. And remember, Genesis is about three things. It's about revelation, revolution, and reconciliation. And we are looking at the revelation of God. Who is God? On Wednesdays, when we get together for Life Group, what I'm going to ask you this coming Wednesday is, what picture do you see being painted about God in Genesis chapter 1? Especially the first verse. God left his calling card in creation. It's no mystery that it's him. And so I am blown away by Genesis 1:1, and for what we will see in the rest of the chapter. Here's the Coram Deo. Here is how we live Genesis 1:1 in the presence and before the face of God. Here's our my three big ideas. On Wednesday at 7 o'clock, I want to hear your big ideas about Genesis 1:1. Here are mine. The first one is, the declaration of God's death is preposterously premature. He is not dead because he can't die, and our very existence in the galactic habitable zone is evidence that he is not dead. Number two, because God alone was in the beginning, he must control the past, the present, and the future. There's a battle for the beginning because the person who controls the past controls the present and the future. And because God was alone in the past, he alone controls the present and the future. Number three, by faith, we believe that God created the material universe ex nihilo, out of nothing. And he sustains our privileged planet as we continue to exist in the galactic habitable zone. Now here's what I'd like you to do for how we respond to the song, to the message. Not a song today. What I want you to do is pull out your journals or your smartphone, and I want you to write a prayer to this God. To the God who creates out of nothing. The God who spoke the universe into existence. To Jesus, who is before all things, and by him all things hold together in that galactic habitable zone. What would you say to that God? He's in the room. What would you say to him? Just a short prayer, one sentence, two sentences. Would you say, Lord, I'm in awe? Mic drop. Lord, my mind is blown. Would you say, how great is our God? Would you say, eyes have not seen, ears have not heard what God has prepared for those who love him? What would you say? Let's pray. God, thank you. Thank you for these 7 words. God, we're grateful that Moshe gave us an introduction to this first book of the Bible. That you, God, are the singular actor, the singular subject, who creates out of nothing everything. You don't need any help from anyone else. You have the power to create. And boy, what a creation you made. So God, I thank you from the bottom of my heart, from the depths of our soul, for your creative act. Our jaws are on the floor because you are that amazing. Bless us as we move forward in Genesis, as we discover your greatness, your majesty, your splendor, your power, your excellence, your marvelousness, your greatness, your glory. May we be in awe, and may it drive us to our knees to worship you in spirit and in truth. We thank you in Jesus' name.